It's been a week of controversy in the ANZ Championship after Irene van Dijk's outburst about the physicality of the Fever's defence in her side's shock 6-goal loss on the weekend. The Magic defender describing her opponents as dirty and having crossed the line of fair play. Norma Plummer has now hit back. There's lots to talk about today as I say hello and welcome to Centre Pass, the official video podcast of the ANZ Championship. Dan Ryan here alongside Kathryn, Harby-Williams, and Kath. It's been a huge week in the ANZ Championship. Plenty of outbursts, lots of controversy.
The best thing about it, Dan, is everybody's talking netball. It's probably not ideal that it's all about the physicality of the game, but what happened to Irene van Dijk was fascinating the other day. It was very uncharacteristic for her. The way that she walked onto the court at quarter time, and I've watched the game twice simply because of the controversy, is that she walked onto the court at quarter time and she looked like a beaten woman. Usually she'd walk on and she'd say, "Beckford Chambers, look out, I'm back." And it wasn't like that at all. And then at the end of the game, when she came out and had those words, she'd been around long enough to actually know that you should have actually suck it in, calm down, and then perhaps work out the right channels to speak your mind. So she's created a storm, which I guess is good.
She certainly has. There's been a storm brewing both here and across the Tasman in New Zealand. Plenty of people talking about this. This, of course, all comes down to the physicality of the sport and where it's going in terms of penalties and big body collisions. This, of course, started people talking in round two when we had the Donna Wilkins-Laura Geitz incident in the Pulse Firebirds match in Wellington. A big hit from Laura Geitz on Donna Wilkins. That got people, particularly the press, talking about the roughness of the sport at the moment.
Look, you don't go to the gym 3, 4, 5 times a week to play tiddlywinks. They are very fine athletes these days. And I've got to say, I've played Donna Wilkins a lot of times and she does bring out the aggressive nature of the play because she too is very physical and she niggles away at you, don't worry about that. So Geitz's reaction was probably as a result. Yes, it was probably out of the spirit of the game. These things happen in sport, you know, she's probably thought about it and it won't happen again. But you can't say that the sport is out of control simply because of that one incident.
Things really came to a head in the Fever Magic game, more so because of the comments made by Van Dijk at the end of the game, which included Van Dijk saying that in all her years of netball, she'd never experienced treatment within the first 5 minutes of a game that she did from Beckford Chambers and Josie Jantz. Norma Plummer then hit back saying that Van Dijk's comments were sad and that the New Zealanders needed to stop whinging when they come up against Australian opposition. What's your take on this Van Dijk versus Plummer incident, I suppose?
Norma Plummer would be absolutely loving it, Dan. She likes to be in the spotlight herself and she always likes to have a say. But as I said, it was very uncharacteristic for Irene to come out and say those things. It was physical in there, but nothing extraordinary as far as I could see. She was getting frustrated. Jantz and Beckford Chambers many times were pushing onto her. There were times when Beckford Chambers would block the space Van Dijk wanted to go into. But my take on it was Beckford Chambers had done her homework. She was following Irene van Dijk's every move. And yes, she was frustrating the player to the point where sometimes as a player you tip yourself over the edge, and I think that's where Van Dijk was, and as a result came out and said those things. I'm a big fan of Irene van Dijk, don't get me wrong, but you know, maybe she'll look back and she'll think maybe there was another way to actually view my opinion.
You've been a defender at the very, very top of the game for a long time in your career, Harbs. As a defender, when you go out on the court, what is the mindset in terms of being aggressive and being tough? And are players in this day and age crossing that line, or who's in control of this?
No, look, you go out there and you think you're better than your opponent. There's no doubt about that. If they're physical, you'll be physical back. You will not take a backward step, or those who are experienced certainly won't. There are times when a player will frustrate you. Sometimes that brings out the best in you, sometimes the worst. But it is a game such, Dan, that the umpires have so much control that unless the umpire's having an absolute shocker, the game will never be totally out of control. So, you know, I certainly didn't think that game the other day was out of control. I think the umpires had a fair grasp on it. Maybe Van Dijk sees it differently, but look, the umpire's in control to the point where players will only push as far as they let you, because you know as a player, the final outcome could be if you push it too far, as you'll be off the court, and that doesn't help your team, and that's certainly not what you want. So I don't think it's out of control. It's just a different style of game these days because players are spending so much time in the gym.
It's a fascinating discussion here on Centre Pass, of course. It's been a huge week of the ANZ Championship. Let's quickly recap all of the results from round 3 of the competition. Of course, it started with the Adelaide Thunderbirds scoring their first ever win in Dunedin, defeating the Southern Steel by 6 goals. The West Coast Fever produced a major upset, knocking off the defending champions in a controversial game, 57-51. The Firebirds were simply too strong for the winless Northern Mystics, the 2011 Premiers taking that one by 21 goals. The Central Pulse notched up their first win of the season, accounting for the New South Wales Swifts 55-49 in Wellington, and the Vixens smashed the Tactics by 20 goals in Melbourne. Kath, as we take a look at the competition ladder at the end of the third round, the Vixens and the Firebirds still undefeated, but reasonably tight from 3rd through to 8th.
Yeah, very tight. You look at the teams down at the bottom there. It's worrisome for the Swifts, and I think it's a lot harder for the Australian teams because they play each other twice. So I think the Swifts are going to struggle because they've got a lot of Australian teams coming up. They perform better against New Zealand sides. The Mystics and Tactics, the Tactics is going to be a tough year for them, and I don't think the Mystics have got the personnel. But yeah, really tight. The Steel and Pulse, they'll be pushing. I expect the Pulse to get above the Steel at some stage, and tight thereafter. So everyone said this season was going to be tough to pick, and I think the scoreboard is showing that at the moment.
It certainly is. Let's turn our attention now to round 4 of the competition. Only 4 games coming your way. Of course, the Melbourne Vixens and Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic having the bye in round 4. The first game we want to talk about, Kathryn, will be a very interesting one. The Adelaide Thunderbirds coming off a win against the Steel, hosting the West Coast Fever. Both teams in pretty good form after what they did in the previous round. There'll be a lot of focus on the Fever defenders in this game, but it should be a pretty tight game nonetheless.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge, Dan, is the fact that Beckford Chambers and Jance have been in the media spotlight. Some players love that, some players hide behind it and don't want it to happen. So it's going to be fascinating to see particularly how Beckford Chambers comes out, because she's got a massive job against Borrego. Caitlin Bassett and Kathryn Cox are the danger players, in my opinion. The mid-court of the Fever are on song, but Cox is the one that generates everything. They're a very high-scoring team, and that's because she just goes off in the long bomb into Bassett. And the Thunderbirds don't have the tallest of defenders to counteract the likes of Bassett. So a danger game for the Thunderbirds, and I think it's going to be a real tight one.
Absolutely. Another big test, too, I guess, for the West Coast Fever, considering their last 2 performances that have been fantastic have been at home. Their last away game against the Swifts in round 1 was terrible. This is a big challenge for them to perform away from their Perth base.
Yeah, and the interesting thing too, Dan, is I think they've only ever once won one time before 3 games in a row, and this is their chance to do that. But we all know against the Magic last week, because they were leading in the last quarter, you felt nervous for them because you know that they'll just sort of let go of the lead, and they did, but luckily they had a large enough lead. So can they cope with the fact that some people will be thinking they're coming into this game and they're going to win it? So it's all about up here for the Fever.
Absolutely, looking forward to that one. The Adelaide Thunderbirds against the West Coast Fever in Adelaide. Another game on Sunday will be a bit of a grudge match. The Southern Steel against the Central Pulse. Of course, it is Robin Broughton, the coach of the Central Pulse, going up against her old franchise. No love lost there. Should be a beauty.
Yeah, look, the media are talking up already because it's not only Broughton, but she's got about 5 past Steel players in her team. I think they're over the fact that it's a major grudge match, but certainly deep down, Broughton left the Steel in controversial circumstances, so she'll be very keen to win. But she has now got a team which, thankfully for her sake, had a win the other day because they've been playing good netball, hadn't notched up a win. They've done that, and they'll like their chances against the Steel. The worrying thing for the Pulse, though, is the Steel are fast scoring because of Fowler. The Pulse aren't, because they've got Wilkins and Thwaite, so they can't throw that long ball in. So that's the concern for the Pulse.
This is the Pulse's first game against a New Zealand club this year. They've had 3 tough games against Australian outfits. Easy for them to adjust back to that style?
Yeah, I think so, because they're so used to it. The hardest thing for the New Zealand side is to come up against the Australian team. So they will feel quite buoyed because they've beaten an Australian team. Now they're back to what they know, so they'll be very confident going into this game.
The next game we want to talk about, Kath, is the New South Wales Swifts hosting the Queensland Firebirds. Both teams have been in New Zealand for the past 2 rounds. The Swifts have lost both. The Firebirds, on the other hand, have won both. Traditionally, these 2 teams have very close matches.
Yeah, look, I saw the stats. In the last 9 matches, it's been 5 goals or less, and that's absolutely incredible. The Swifts, in contrast to the Firebirds, have one avenue to goal as far as I'm concerned, and that's Pratley. Shut her down, and the Swifts are struggling. They really don't have the strength in the mid-court to keep supplying the ball into that Swifts shooting circle, whereas the Firebirds have Aitken, who's playing very well. Medhurst is playing a nice support role, and their mid-court is actually coming on. So it's going to be a tough one for the Swifts. They really need a win if they're going to be a chance to play finals, but the Firebirds are playing some pretty good netball at the moment.
They certainly are, the premiers from 2011. Our final game that we want to talk about, Kat, in round 4 is The two winless teams of the competition, the Canterbury Tactics hosting the Northern Mystics. The good news is one team will get their first win of the season. The bad news is the other team will probably take up dead last.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. If you like stats, their average losing margin is 20.6 goals. Isn't that fascinating? which means it's going to be nice for one of those teams to win, as you said. There's always a concern for the Mystics, I think, because they've lost Anna Harrison, they've lost that height and experience in the goal circle. So Moulds, she's been struggling, but she will be pleased with the fact that she's come out against Jo Harton, who's not 7 foot, she's only 6 foot. and that's a good thing for them. She really needs to try and work with those defenders, because defensively the Mystics are really leaking a lot of goals. And so are both teams. So I guess what I'm saying is the defensive unit of both teams, the one that steps up is the one that's going to win that game.
We've spoken a lot about the Mystics, of course. We know there's no Anna Harrison and Charlotte Kite in that backline because of injuries and pregnancy. One player that we probably haven't spoken about a lot is that of Temepara George. Yeah. It just goes to prove that some players are irreplaceable, and her leadership throughout that full court is really absent in the Mystics this year.
Absolutely. I mean, she's one of the main reasons they are struggling. She has been the heart and soul for the Mystics, not just with her on-court play and leadership, but what she did off the court. She was a through and through Mystics girl, and particularly when young players were coming through the system, she'd be there to guide them, and she was the absolute general in the mid-court. And because they've lost those two defenders, they had to reshuffle, their positioning and their thinking, and with George's absence as well, it's almost a shambles. It's tough going for them.
So that is the game on Monday night, the Northern Mystics facing the Canterbury Tactics in Christchurch. Well, Kath, it's now time to get your tips. We did all right last round, 4 from 5. We've got 4 games this round. Who are you backing?
Well, you're not allowed to copy me, because otherwise, well, you can, because then I'll stay 1 game ahead
Well,
like I am at the moment.
Sheet, Kath, and I won't copy.
Okay, we've got the Thunderbirds Fever. Oh, that's really tight. Thunderbirds, but it's very hard to tip a winner. Pulse and Steel, I'm going for the Pulse. Swifts and Firebirds, I think the Swifts are struggling, so it'll be the Firebirds for me. And Mystics, Tactics. Mystics are too strong for the Tactics.
Sorry, Kath, but I'm going the same way. So I'm going Thunderbirds over the Fever, the Pulse over the Steel, the Firebirds over the New South Wales Swifts, and of course the Mystics over the Canterbury Tactics.
And next week you're doing the tips first, Dan.
Done, no problem at all. Well, that's all we have time for this week's edition of Centre Pass. Kathryn, Harby-Williams, thank you once again for all your insights and great discussion early on in the show about the physicality of the sport. We love it. Make sure you check out the ANZ Champs website for all of the broadcast details for round 4 of the competition. Enjoy the netball. We'll catch you next week.